there is two types of the heat. Number one is dry heat, which means you do not have any moisture. What a good example for that. A toasted bread. Did you do that every day? I do that for my son lots of the time. We buy bread, we toast it, they put the gel there. Toasted bread. This is going to happen. It's called the dextratization. Dextratization. Now what happened, it will generate dextrin and pyrodextrin. What is going to be the dextrin looks like? This will be like a disaccharide. So you will feeling the toasted bread, it has a light sweet. Not really sweet, light sweet, compared to just the bread. Now pyrodextrin, this guy is composed by, is contributed for your aroma, color, and of course the taste. And we know this involved caramelization, which is we talk about caramel, and Maillard reaction with reducing sugar with amino group of the protein. So we already talked about this section actually. Okay, so this is the first one. Now when we talk about this gelatinization is actually a starch with heat and with water. So it is a moisture. It is a moist heat or moist heat. It's not a dry heat. Okay. Now what gonna they generate? It will generate some of the gel-like formation. Will become swelling. What is a good example? Did you ever eat a pasta? Or like a noodle. A pasta is more obvious. When you see pasta is this small, is that right? Piece by piece. Or macaroni cheese, it's the same thing. So when you heat it, what's the temperature? 55 to 85 degrees Celsius. What it looks like? Does that become like large, like this? Of course, lower temperature is going to be little bit smaller. Higher temperature is large. Longer time is large, and it is relatively irreversible. Is that right? You make this like this, you're not going to become like that again, even you dried it up. So this is an example. We call it gelatinization. Okay, what's going to really happen about here? That's what we're going to talk about in here. Okay, so we'll talk about here the gelatinization is actually with moist heat. So this is going to happen. What happened? First of all, you need to know. I should have make it a little bit smaller at the beginning. Starch is a granule. Inside of the granule, we mentioned basically major amylose and what? Amylopectin, okay? Or maybe something like this. This is amylopectin. And remember, this connected with the hydrogen bonds. Okay. If you have a moisture, you have a heat, 55 to 85 degrees Celsius. What is going to happen inside of this granule? This is going to become large. Okay? What's going to happen? We had hydrogen bonds right here. These hydrogen bonds, first of all, will break. Attached by what? Water. Will break, attached by the water. Because of the water coming, so it becomes swelling. Aminopectin there, are they going to be affected? Yes, but they'll be much more slowly developed. It will be delayed to developing anything. So, gelatinization more important in relation to the amylose. So this water goes there. It's going to happen in swelling. Now, what's the function of this water? It's like a scissor. It's like we call it a plasticizer. The function of this water, which make the status of a starch from glassy to rubbery, which is an unstable and mixed status. Then what's going to happen? Of course, it's swelling. Then viscous, okay, and transparent. So this is the stage that's going to happen. Okay, move on to the next stage. What is going to happen? These amylose will actually leave out of this granule. That we call it amylose leaching. And then, how about this stuff? Aminopectin. These condensed and formed like a gel. Okay? So then the question is, what type of the factors will be impact the gelatinization? Also, ratio gradation. We haven't mentioned that yet, but what are the factors? Number one, the ratio of amylose and aminopectin. Why it is important? Because amylose play an important role during the gelatinization. Number two is the chain length. Why it is important? Some of the products, let's say the waxy starch or waxy corn, the amylose is very low. Aminopectin is higher. Now what happened? Okay, let's say we have a product. The amylose is like this. It's a short chain. Then it's not going to play much important role there. But how about if there is a product, the amylose chain is very long? What's going to happen? They also will forming hydrogen bonds. Once they forming the hydrogen bonds, it's same like amylose. Okay, so that's why The chain length is important, the ratio is important. Another thing we also want to mention, if in a product, the amylose is very, very packed, it's overlapped even, then what's going to happen? These hydrogen bonds will stack very tight, so it's not easy to break them. So the ratio is important. Is amylose is very high, and they also overlap. Then the hydrogen bonds connected with each other. It's not easy to hydrolyze. Use water to plasticize it, to slice it. And amylopectin is, if it's a very long chain, then in the products it will become like lots of the hydrogen bonds connected. So the characteristics similar to amylose, even with amylopectin. So that's why the chain length is important. Now, number 3 is the amount of the fatty acids and the salt. Now, salt, we know the osmotic balance will be changed. So maybe not much water there, maybe absorbed too much water. How about fatty acids? Remember, this is a granule. If the granule has too many fatty acids, what happens? If too much FAC, it will become hydrophobic. Therefore, not very easy to attract the water. Okay? So, these are the things I want to mention. Now, we want to mention another thing. Gelatinization finished. Then, of course, we can eat. Then why we want to eat it? Why it's good for eat? Because it's a very good digestible product. Which means it's easier to be hydrolyzed with the enzyme, with the bacteria in the body. It's digestible. Okay? All right, we mentioned this one for the gelatinization. Okay, what is retrodegradation? You want to mention another example. Did you ever buy a bread? It's a bag of the bread. One piece, piece by piece, okay? Sliced bread. If this bread put in refrigerator for a week or 2, then you take it out, what it looks like? It's become tough. Is that right? A low water amount. Some people like it. It's a little bit crusted. And the bread originally a little bit crusted because when they cook it, they heat it, they dry it. During the drying process, it's already starting to become tough and lose water. This phenomenon we call bread staling. It's a good example to retrogradation. What happened is we have this guy right here, okay? There's a water there. Once the temperature is higher, the water is going, then you start to dry or start to cool down a little bit. Then these type of hydrogen bonds is partially recovered. And partially recrystalline. Then it becomes retrogradation. However, retrogradation, because they lose some of the water and they become tough, so it's a low quality product. It is undigestible, or we say low digestible. What that means, it's not easy to be digested. If undigested products at the end of the day, more likely will become a human store sample comes out. However, during the manufacturing products, sometimes we trying to make up something, we make something. It is called diabetic foods. We want them to be low digestible because we want to delay the blood glucose level to the peak level. We delay it. Because the starch is a sugar. When you use it, you eat it, we use amylose or something, become the glucose. If it's really digestible, the blood glucose peak is very easy to come in. Not good for diabetic patient. If you delay that, it will become a diabetic foods. Okay, so there is a good thing for that. However, bread stealing is not good. Then, we also want to mention how to prevent that. Did you ever notice if you buy a bag of the bread from Whole Foods or some of the market, they actually frozen it. And the frozen is the method to prevent the bread stealing. Okay? And right now, in our real lifetime, we also could be added some of the ingredients like lipids and some of the surfactants. There is a chemical called glyceropalmitate. This is the ingredients we add into the manufacturing of the bread. We can delay or avoid, partially avoid of the bread stealing. Okay, so that's something just to let you know about it. Now, last thing I want to mention for the retrogradation. Retrogradation is highly impacted by the components number of the glucose units. So give you an example. The cornstarch is about 400 units. And the potato starch is 2,000 units of the glucose. Therefore, you can see the retrogradation for cornstarch is much easier than potato starch. That's obviously cornstarch is the ingredients to make bread lots of times. Okay? So that's something is important and I want to mention here. You can read through all these. I already talked about that. You can see the gelatinization, what it means. What is granular resolved in irreversible manner, become a gel, it's viscous and transparent. And the pasta preparation, that's an example. And this is a bread stealing, we already mentioned. Now here, I want to mention this. This is kind of a confusing sentence here. The freezing accelerates the process. This means for the starch paste. It's like a starch, a mixture of the starch, called a starch paste after heating. If you do a freezing, it accelerates the ritual degradation process. Okay, so just let you know about that. Means starch paste. For the bread, the freezing is a good way to actually prevent that. And we mentioned about here, it's a shrinkage, water is released, and this depends on the lipid component, amylose, amylopectin ratio, chain length, and these things we already mentioned. Okay. Now we want to mention another thing. This is everybody knows, and we talk about it, but just not very specific. Starch, we know we use amines. Could be hydrolyzed. So what type of the amines we have? Number one is we call alpha amines. Alpha amines can be attacking both amylose and amylopectin. But it is more specific when attacking 1,2,4 glycosidic bonds. So most of the time, this alpha amylose has to be combined use with glucoamylase, because glucoamylase attacking both 1,2,4 and 1,2,6 glycosidic bonds. So more effectively to hydrolyze starch. And more specific for maltose, we have beta amylase. However, this is not going to attacking 1,2,6 glycosidic. And this guy is specific for maltose. Okay, the last one. We call it isoamylase, or we say glulanase. This is the function is debranching, which means attacking amylopectin, so has 1,2,6 debounding 1,2,6 glycosidic bonds. Okay, so these are the introduction of these starch degradation system. And most of the time, we rarely used to do is combine the use of them. Next one we want to mention is called resistant starch. So what that means? We talk about starch, in corn starch, potato starch, those are actually is digestible and we can eat it. But in the real life, there is something which is partially digestible or slow digestible. They're not going to be, sometimes they're not digested very well in the small intestinal and may be fermented by bacteria in the large intestinal. There are 4 different categories. And we gave them the number RS1 to RS4. RS1 is a physical protection. This is like some beans. Okay, undigestible. That's easy to understand. Some beans, some seeds. The second one is closely packed. Granule. So, undigestible. Example, green banana. Resistant number 3, this is the one we mentioned. Retrogradation products. It's a modified bread. Now, I mentioned earlier, sometimes we want to make those because it's slow digestible. It's good for the diabetic patients. Number 4. This is completely chemical modified starch. For any type of the reason. Completely modified starch. Okay. Okay, last one we want to mention is a starch hydrolysis. How we hydrolyze starch. So we had a starch, basically using acid, using enzyme, or even with a little bit of heat. Or we say hot acid will become dextrin. We mentioned earlier. This is called starch hydrolysis. Now, why it is important? Because the dextrin is a good filler of the products sometimes. It is a good carrier for the flavor, aroma, all of those. And it also could be a good coating. Now, how we evaluate the level of the starch hydrolysis? We using a terminology called DD, dextrose equivalent. And the formula from the DE to DP is DE equals 100 divided by degree of polymerization. But this D is degree of polymerization. This D is dextrose equivalence. They're using this index to see the amount of reducing sugar present as dextrose and calculated as a percentage of total dry matter. That expressed as percentage of reducing power coming from pure glucose. What are the good examples? First of all, you need to know, if the DE value is less than 20, we call it maltodextrose. This is basically is a filler, which means it's like a container to fill other ingredients. It's not sweet at all, so it's not a sweetness. It is non-hygroscopic, which means it's not sensitive to the water, so it's not going to be absorbed the water very quickly. Most of the time, what we care about is the DE value between 20 to 60. Because that's belonging to a major starch products, which is corn syrup solids. That's a major sweetener used in the industry. Typically, the DE42 is used widely in the food products because it's a very high level of osmotic value. Therefore, the bacteria will not grow there because once the bacteria touch it, it will lose all the water, will be dehydrated, and also resistant to the crystallization. So DE42, this value, we use a lot. And it is very hygroscopic, like a coffee powder. Remember, we had a question for you in the homework. What means hygroscopic? Which means very sensitive to the heat. Very sensitive to the moisture amount in the environment. You have to use in a sealed container, not in a PVC film or those type of things. Once the DE value is above 55, we also try to avoid use it unless you have some